Welcome to Corporate Boards. Who's Missing? I'm Vanessa Bowling Adjavan, HACR's Director of Administration and Human Resources, and I'm happy to have you joining us today. Today's session will explore the state of Hispanic representation in corporate boardrooms with the latest research from HACR in conjunction with the Alliance for Board Diversity and Deloitte. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize our sponsor. Please enjoy this short video from Nationwide.
Our unique difference is our associates. From the top of the house to the front line, we share a commitment to diversity and inclusion. We also recognize that diversity and inclusion is a journey, with wins and celebrations along the way. We retain associates because of our inclusive culture, a culture that not only provides a safe, fair, and trusting environment, but also an environment that provides equal access to opportunities. At Nationwide, diversity and inclusion is simply who we are. We intentionally create an environment where everyone can bring their best self to work. We purposefully invest in a culture that lifts all. We know when we have an inclusive culture, a culture that values and respects all, and where everyone proudly brings their differences to work each day, it's these differences that create fresh ideas, drive business success, and fuel innovation. Our associates will continue to elevate our inclusive culture by providing extraordinary care to each other, our customers, partners, and communities. Because of our associates, we have a culture of caring that makes a difference. We remain deeply committed to continuing to grow our diverse and inclusive workplace. And we'll continue to ask for and listen to feedback from our associates. I cannot be more excited and energized about our future. I am so proud to work for a company that has an unwavering commitment to diversity and inclusion with intentionality and purpose. There is power in appreciating and embracing difference. Our unique differences make us a stronger company.
Thank you, Nationwide, for your continued support of HACR and your dedication to Hispanic inclusion. Now, to get this thought-provoking session underway, I'd like to introduce you to Carey, National Managing Partner at the Deloitte Center for Board Effectiveness. Welcome, Carey.
Thanks, Vanessa, and hi, everyone, and welcome to our session today. And on behalf of Deloitte, we are so pleased to collaborate with HACR and the Alliance for Board Diversity to focus on this ever important and increasingly more important topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in the boardroom and how we govern. And for those of you that aren't familiar, our Deloitte and Alliance collaboration, we recently issued our Missing Pieces report, which is a multi-year study and census of diversity on Fortune 500 boards. And we recently issued our 6th edition based on 2020 census data, and our report highlights the progress that's been made, and in some cases, the progress that has not been made in equitable representation on corporate boards. So I am very pleased today to be joined by not only HACR, but our leading members of the Alliance to discuss the recent trends and goals on this important topic, some of the data we found out in our report, and some of the things that focus on the progress that has yet to come. So let's introduce our panelists now, and I would ask that you please reference the speaker bios in the symposium platform. And first, Sid, who is our president and CEO of HACR, and of course needs no introduction, but we're so pleased for his leadership here, and he's hosting us today. So thank you, Sid, for all you do with HACR, with this symposium, and really glad to have this session here. We're also joined by Linda Akutagawa, who is our president and CEO of LEAP, the Leadership Education for Asia Pacifics. Again, Linda, so glad for your leadership with the Alliance and what you're doing on this topic. Also, I'm pleased to welcome Lorraine Hariton, who is the president and CEO of Catalyst, a global nonprofit who works with leading executives and companies around the advancement of women. And Lorraine, just love all the work that you do. So thanks for being here. And finally, we have Michael Hyter, who's the president and CEO of the ELC, the Executive Leadership Council, which is a preeminent organization for Black senior executives and board directors. So thank you also for being here. And I can tell you in my work here with Sid, Linda, Lorraine, and Mike, I am so very pleased that we are on this journey together. You are all rock stars doing incredibly important work for all of us. So I'm really excited to start this interactive discussion today. So let's just get to it, since I know we have could talk for a long time on this topic. And Linda, I'm actually going to start with you. So you are all members, esteemed members of the Alliance for Board Diversity, and I'd love it if you could share some more about the Alliance, its history, its role in the corporate accountability effort for diversity in the boardroom, and of course, your collaboration with us on the Missing Pieces report and your opinions on that and how we're making progress on diversity and inclusion. So first, over to you, Linda.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carey, for having me. Sid, thank you for having me. This is an HACR event, and you've been great as a partner of ABD, but also ensuring that, the word about corporate board diversity is always going to be front and center in terms of your conference as well too. And Carey, thank you so much for moderating this conversation and for being such a great partner to the ABD. So let me just share a little bit very briefly about the ABD, the Alliance for Board Diversity. We began with our first report in 2004. We came together as a coalition to really advocate for greater diversity on Fortune 500 corporate boards. And I'll just start here by saying, part of the reason why we did it is that we knew that if we weren't asking questions, if we were not, or if somebody was not asking questions, if somebody was not, putting out the numbers, people were making assumptions about the state of diversity on corporate boards. And that assumption was that things were a lot better than they actually were. And I like to say this a lot: what gets measured gets done. And so we realized that if we don't start putting out at least some hard numbers to really state what is the kind of the state of corporate board diversity, then there wasn't going to be any attention on it. And so I'm proud to say that our continued advocacy has also inspired others to do the same, and that we believe that as we've been doing this work and over the last three cycles of our report in conjunction with Deloitte, I'm really proud to say that I think we've seen an acceleration in this interest and in this work, and that we're starting to see some slow but steady progress happening.
Thanks, Linda. I know I too am encouraged by some of the progress that we've seen in the 2020 report, and I always love your words around what's measured gets done, and I've used that quite a bit now when we talk about this topic. And maybe, Mike, to that end, in terms of what measured gets done, the Missing Pieces report really looks at census data on diversity that in the boardroom as of 2020. And I would love your thoughts on how you think companies can use this data to build and continue to build and support governance practices around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really starting with their own boardrooms and composition. So would love your views on how you think companies can use this data.
Well, thanks, Carey, and be happy to. And thank you, Sid, for the opportunity for me to be here as well. What is particularly what's notable about the Missing Pieces report is that, unlike other reports, it disaggregates the data around board diversity, and it breaks down by women and minority groups, so you can clearly see how much or how little progress is actually being made. And when the data isn't disaggregated and broken down by groups, it presents this false narrative that the state of board diversity, as Linda was referencing, is much better than it really is. So when you disaggregate the data, you see that there is much more work that still needs to be done when it comes to ethnic minority groups. And to that point, it is important that companies begin to view the Missing Pieces report, the data with the Missing Pieces report, as much more than facts and figures, that it tells the true story of the experiences and challenges of executives of color today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I know, really understanding that it's not just about looking at the metrics in aggregate, but really understanding the detail that really does make the difference. And as we think about the details, Sid, I'd like to just turn to you. And, given your HACR leadership, perhaps you can share some reflections on the board composition census data, specific to Hispanic, Latinx findings in the report. And in your views, how are we making progress here and what more needs to be done?
Well, thank you, Carey. And of course, thank you to all of our ABD brothers and sisters who are really in this movement to advance inclusion on corporate boards, and now, of course, in the future. So, Carey, to look at what are some things that we've seen from the years of research, and what are some of the conclusions? We've seen progress in terms of Hispanic representation on boards. However, it is not nearly where it should be, similar to to what we're seeing for people of color in general, and especially in the case of women of color. It's only about 4.1% representation of Hispanics and Latinos on Fortune 500 boards, of which only 1% are Latina, and the movement of that over the last 10 years has only been about maybe 120 basis points movements over that period, which, as you can imagine, is very slow progress. And so it means that we need to do more in order to raise the awareness that when we're thinking about inclusion on corporate boards, that we are thinking about all of our communities, of course, including the Hispanic Latino communities. But I think that one of the things that we'll be emphasizing a lot is Latina inclusion, because the numbers are just so low, and that despite the fact that when you look at economic buying power, when you look at the population growth, when you look at the amount of influence in terms of the contribution to our economy, it's just not reflected on corporate boards. So one of the things that we continue to call on corporate America to do is that they have to think about intentional inclusion. Intentional inclusion is recognizing that your board is not diverse and is not reflective of what it should be between your consumers, your employees, and your and what you are looking to try to do to look ahead as a reflection of where our country is heading. So we have a lot of work to do in this space, and we look forward to continuing our with the movement to be able to advance inclusion for Hispanics as well as African American women and Asian Pacifics.
Sid, very well said. Thank you for that. And I know that, as you mentioned, we've made progress, and we should be pleased about that progress. But when we look at equitable representation within the boardroom, we know that we're decades away, several decades away. And I think you're right. It just proves that there's so much more to do. I also loved kind of your comments around women, and particularly Latino women. And I know someone that has a very strong view around gender diversity in the boardroom is Lorraine. And so, Lorraine, I'm going to come to you with a question around, really recruitment into the boardroom. And I think we can all agree that the corporate board membership kind of to date has kind of felt like a little of an insider's game. And oftentimes, insiders within this, I'll say, relatively close-knit community looking for those that look like them. So would love your views on what insider practices are the hardest to break. What data do we have that supports that? And frankly, what can we do to kind of change this?
Yeah, Carey, thank you. And it's really great to be here at HACR. And Sid, thank you for the invitation. We sometimes think that that the practices in the boardroom have evolved a lot. And I think on large public boards where there's a lot of scrutiny, there's very good governance practices. But as you get into smaller companies in the Russell 3000 and then private companies, we still have the really hard to break practice of people wanting to bring in people who are like themselves, who they know, who they trust, who's in their network. They've known them for a long period of time. And they reach out when they have a board opening. They reach out to the people that they know, or maybe 1 degree of separation from the people they know. But we know that when they do that, they are not going to have a diverse pool. And it's clear from a business perspective that if you want to have good governance, if you want to have good business decision making, if you want to reflect the population you're serving, especially consumers, that you need to be more diverse. So the Nom and Gov committee, the CEO, they have to be really committed with intentionality, as Sid just mentioned, to address these issues. So it means they can't just do what I've seen. I've served on several public boards. Tell me who you know. Let's look for someone who can do this and can run the audit committee, and then they just get their friends. That will not work. So the things that boards need to do is, first of all, they need to have a skills matrix that includes also diversity as a key agenda item. And they need to start to go out to other networks beyond the usual candidates. And those networks are there. They can come to HACR. They can come to, Catalyst. They can go to, I'm involved in this Stanford Women on Boards, or the Women's Corporate Directors. There's lots of networks that are available so that you start getting beyond the people you would normally go to. But that takes intentionality. It takes time. It takes a commitment. But in the end, you can, end up with a much more robust board that can have better decision making. Some other things that they can do is they can add a board seat. Sometimes turnover on boards are not what they need to be. That's one of the issues that makes it difficult to make progress, is that the turnover is slow, but you can add a board seat. You can also broaden the criteria. Not everyone has to be a CEO of a company. They can look for other positions and other skill sets to bring in. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to make progress and increase progress and break some of these old habits. But, there's got to be a commitment to doing that.
I love that, Linda. Thank you. You're right. It has that concept of intentionality and commitment, underscores making progress on this topic. And I appreciate you raising that. You talked a bit about the concept of recruitment as well. And one of the things I would like to maybe get Linda's perspective on is that, oftentimes we hear that people are well-intentioned, but they don't know where to go, or they don't know where to find diverse candidates. And you gave us a few pointers on that, Lorraine. But Linda, given your work with the Alliance and more broadly, what would you say when you hear someone says, I can't find diverse candidates, I'm looking, but I can't find? And maybe perhaps share a little bit of a double click on where to best find diversity in recruitment.
Well, thanks very much for that question. And first off, I just want to say, just unequivocally, we don't have a supply problem. There are plenty of very talented and qualified, diverse board candidates out there. And in fact, there are probably more available candidates than there are available board seats. And so when I hear, just the statement that we can find qualified candidates, it just tells me that, as Lorraine had stated, they're not being intentional and they're not trying hard enough. And so, she spoke about diverse organizations who could be resources for diverse candidates, and certainly, the ABD organizations, a number of different efforts that are out there in terms of sourcing diverse candidates. And I would just say, just to piggyback on what Lorraine had said, when you think about it, any candidate that any of our organizations, or any organization that is going to put forward a diverse candidate for a board seat is not going to suggest somebody who is not qualified, who is not capable, who doesn't have the talent or the the ability to serve on a corporate board. I'll just say this: none of us are going to put our organization's reputation on the line to put forward somebody who we don't believe is going to do a really great job. And I think that I'll just be blunt. I think for a lot of us, coming from diverse backgrounds, we have learned very much the hard way that we need to work harder. We need to do more. And I think that anybody who is going to be, searching out diverse candidates is going to find that not only are they going to benefit more, but as has been already said by several of us on this panel, the changes are afoot, and both from an employee perspective, from a talent, a marketplace perspective, just in terms of a business perspective, there's going to the benefits are just exponentially so much more in favor of having more diverse candidates that I would just say to any company that says I can't find a diverse candidate, then I would really just say, well, how long are you going to be around given the changes that are happening, not only in this country, but across the globe too?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And I love your comment about it is not a supply problem. It is more of that demand problem, and making sure that we have a broader aperture of where to look for candidates. I also thought, Lorraine, you made a great comment around the skills matrix, and thinking about those skills actually do reside in roles and titles differently than maybe traditional board seats look for. So going beyond the C-suite and really looking for those skills and those capabilities in a broader swath. So I love that concept. I also know that oftentimes we struggle with, and our report actually talked about the concept of a recycle rate, which is not only once we get diversity in the boardroom, but are we giving just repeat seats to a small group versus really thinking broadly about candidates. And Mike, I would love your views on that, which is, if you could just talk a bit about this concept of a recycle rate, why it's important, what does our data tell us about it, and what more we need to do around recycle.
I'd be happy to, Carey. The recycle rate is the rate at which boards go to the same pool of sitting board directors to identify board candidates. You just basically talk to the people that and recycling is more prevalent among Black and other ethnic minority candidates. The underlying implication is that the decision makers are more comfortable with selecting a known quantity to sit on their boards. So the result is that you end up with the same Black or Hispanic or Asian directors on different boards instead of tapping the diverse pool of board candidates who are just as qualified to serve in the seats. And this year's data confirmed that these rates are lower today than they were in 2018, for example. Yet there is still an issue that's prevalent, and specifically, I'm just using with Black board members, given our statistics, that just 2 out of every 5 seats occupied by Black board members were held by a person serving on multiple Fortune 500 boards. The average percentage of board seats held by African American and Black directors on other boards is 43%. That shows a similar pattern of high concentration that the seat level analysis indicated by their white counterparts. So I'm glad you asked that question because it often gets overlooked. That the net is that you can reduce the recycle rate by opening seats to people who aren't on boards, who are just as qualified, to Linda's point earlier.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, just kind of comparing that again to Linda's comments around there is a broader ocean of candidates that we need to be fishing out of. And also thinking about, again, just those that actually have secured board seats, how do we, bring others into that fold and pay that forward? So I think we're happy to see the progress of diversification on boards, but also we want to diversify that diversification.
Exactly.
And on that point, one of the things that our data showed in the Missing Pieces report, that there was a handful of Fortune 100 companies that have boards of directors that are still 100% white men. So I would love, Lorraine, your views on this. I mean, I know we saw the groundswell from some of our earlier census reports that many of that kind of check the box on diversity was done through women placements. And now we're looking at, again, that disaggregation of data and making sure we have representation both on gender and race. But we still have some companies that aren't quite getting it. I would love your views on that.
Well, it's hard to believe in this day and age that we are still have the last holdouts, but I think it gets back to the conversation we just have about people feeling comfortable and going to their networks. But what I would say to these companies is, first of all, the times are changing and they've got to get with the program, because investors, employees, regulators, all the stakeholders are looking, and they're evaluating the company's performance based on how diverse a board they have. And all the data shows that companies that have more diverse boards, more diverse leadership, get better results. So, and I would say to them, if they don't start addressing this issue, they're going to start to have less people investing in them, less employees wanting to work for them. We know, in this great resignation thing that everyone's dealing with, that people are very interested in the culture, in the values, in what they see in their companies, and that's reflected in the boards. And we also know in the United States that we the percentage of people of color is over 40%. It's going towards 50%, and we need to reflect the population that we're serving. Same with women, have more buying power, more investing power. So companies who do not get with the program here are not going to be competitive. That's my bottom line to them.
I love that bottom line, Lorraine. I'm going to put you up against those boards as well. You make the case so well. And I'll come back to you in just a minute on the concept of regulation that you teed up. But before we kind of leave the concepts of diversification and candidate pools, recycle rate, and like the board diversification, I'll say recruitment processes, Sid, I want to come back to you and specifically ask your recommendations that you think are important to promote progress specific in your HACR and Hispanic Latinx community.
Sure. Well, the one common denominator that you're hearing from Michael, Lorraine, and Linda is that there must be a cultural shift by corporate America in order to improve their board diversity. And here's what I mean by that in terms of a cultural shift. We know, as Lorraine mentioned, that the business case is already out there. I mean, that we know. But what happens is that there are still some companies that will protect their old school culture, even at the expense of progress and growth, by having a more diverse board. And that is where it's going to be increasingly important to educate shareholders, as Lorraine mentioned, which I think is an outstanding strategy, because shareholders are going to say, no, we want more growth. And we think that having more diverse boards is a way to do that. But when you think about the issues in terms of, the common thing we hear as Linda shared about companies that make excuses that we simply can't find proper talent. When I get a company that tells me I can't find enough Latinos to serve on boards, I tell them, well, step one is stop looking west, looking for a sunrise. If you keep looking west and you're complaining, where is my sunrise? I can't find my sunrise. Can you help me find a sunrise? My first is turn around, look east, and you'll find an ample pool of a sunrise. The same applies when you're being intentional about inclusion on your corporate boards. If the issue is that you just don't know where to find us, the first step is to come into our communities. collaborate with the ABD member organizations and many other institutions that are out there where you can find the ample pool. But you have to come into the community and not expect that just because you might be on a non-diverse board that you're going to have the answers on where to find diverse candidates. And then the other part is that as Michael mentioned, the recycle rate is a reflection of the fact that we have a very high recycle rate of existing board directors, people of color, and it's an indication that that getting on a board has less to do with your qualifications and more to do with your network and credibility. But we know that we have a very strong, credible number of board directors that are ready to go. But corporate America needs to understand that you have to come into our community. And as you come into our communities, you will see the fact that we have outstanding candidates that can serve on your boards, serve not only as board members, but serve as your committee chairs, serve as lead directors, serve as board chairs of your boards. And we know that when given that opportunity, that will happen, but that's going to require a cultural shift and recognizing that companies must stop holding on to an old school culture on their board that just does not reflect where we are today and where we need to go as a community and as a country.
Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate those comments. And I'd like to come back to that here later, specifically about how we actually allow diverse candidates to thrive on boards. So I will talk about that, ask a couple questions on that here in a minute. But before that, I mean, you acknowledge that there has been progress made, and we do acknowledge that. And Linda, I'd love for you to talk again with your years at the Alliance. What do you think has been maybe even noted in our report, or even noted most recently from the groundswell of this topic being on so many board agendas? What do you think is the most positive change that we've made, and specifically that are aligned with the goals for the Alliance for Board Diversity?
Well, I'm gonna actually talk about a couple of points. One is a number of years ago, the ABD set a goal of 40% diversity of women and minorities on Fortune 500 corporate boards. And I will say that we're getting close to that number. We're at roughly about 38%. And then in the Fortune 100, we're at just over 42%. So in that sense, when you combine both women and minorities on boards, we've made some progress, and we're happy to see that. As I mentioned earlier, it's steady. Slow but steady. However, if you were to disaggregate it, as Mike had mentioned, if you look at just race and ethnic minorities on boards, our numbers are a lot lower. I think we're at about 70%, and we have quite a ways to go in terms of seeing greater diversity from a race and ethnicity point of view. And as Lorraine had also mentioned too, people of color in just the U.S. alone are moving towards nearly 50% of the total population. We're at about 40-some%. And so, just seeing that reflected in boards would be important. So there's work to be done, but we're happy to see that there's been progress from previous years. The other thing that I do want to note, and I think this speaks to the progress that we've seen, and I will just say that I'll remain cautiously optimistic about this, is the makeup of the committees, and in particular the board nom gov committees, and who's chairing them, and who are members of those committees. And we're seeing that actually those board non-gov committees are increasingly made up of women and minorities. And I think that that's a good sign, in the hopes that they will at least bring, raising the questions, bring that intentionality that we've spoken about, bring some of the networks that we hope that they'll be able to or willing to utilize to tap into these diverse networks of the diverse organizations that we believe, including the ABD organizations, that we believe will be able to help bring new perspectives, this new group of very talented and qualified and diverse candidates to the realm of corporate boards.
Great, thanks, Linda. And again, really positive to see some of the progress that we have made, but so much more to do, as you mentioned. And on that concept of more to do, I mean, you've all talked about the business case is there, and the business case in results that are driven by organizations that have more diverse boards, et cetera. But we also know a bit of a carrot and the stick here. And I'd like to kind of come to Lorraine to talk a bit about the stick that is looming out there with either regulations that have already been passed or that are coming, and in broad and very visible ways in terms of regulation around moving the needle on diverse boards. So I would love, Lorraine, for you to talk a little bit about regulation and how will that help in this effort.
Well, Carey, we'd like to think that the carrot of better business results would move the needle. And I think it has. We've absolutely made progress. I mean, progress, especially as we were talking about for women, we're getting in the Fortune 1000 close to 30%. And as we said, we still have more work to do on diversity. But there's no question that the oversight bodies understand that the business case and the need and the importance of diversity. So they have come in and are starting to put more pressure on companies to make progress. So, in Europe, for example, in France, this has been in place for quite a while. And if you look at the French boards, you have much better representation of women, for example. In California, a couple of years ago, they started out with requiring women on the boards, and now they've moved to diversity statistics as well. You recently saw that the NASDAQ put in a request to the SEC to have gender or race diversity and some numbers on that, and that was approved and supported by the SEC. And then ISS and different oversight bodies who are responsible for rating the governance of boards are dinging boards if they don't have this, and that goes out to investors. And you see that that everyone who's responsible for oversight, for looking at good governance, understands that diversity is critical on boards. So I will have to say this, just like in Biden yesterday, he tried the carrot, now he's doing the stick. And I think boards need to around the vaccination understand that regulators and people who are responsible for good oversight are more and more going to be doing that if they don't see the progress being made.
Yeah, very, very well said. And again, I mean, like as you mentioned, we've hoped that we didn't need the stick, and we did make some progress with the carrot, but we are at the point where we know we need to do more. And so, given that, and Mike, I'd love your views. Do you think that this is a call to action to the corporate sector, regulation or not? I mean, I would love your views on what you think that call to action is for corporate America.
Well, Carey, one of the things that I always think should be underscored in these kind of conversations, especially as it relates to people of color in corporate America, is the perception of limited ability as compared to other people. There's still a stigma about people of color and Black executives specifically, where their talent and ability is still that is still prominent, despite the gains our research and so many others show. So that perception is a problem. And so my call to action is not only to prioritize the representation of people of color and other for corporate boards, but to continue working towards a more equitable workplace that weeds out the systemic beliefs that prevent minority communities from climbing the ladder. I mean, that's the call to action, and it address what are the headwinds that are in the system of how your decisions are made that is actually preventing people of ethnic descent, opportunities to be a part of the organization as a board. So, because companies who manage to do this work simultaneously will meet the diversity, inclusion, and equity demands that this moment calls for.
Mike, that is incredibly well said. I think, as you mentioned, it's not only about representation in the boardroom, it's also thinking about how our board helps govern practices around diversity, equity, inclusion that allows this as a workplace for people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds to thrive and actually to see a way to progress and ultimately to progress to the board. So I think that is absolutely a challenge. I know many of the boards that we're working with are not only looking at composition, but how we actually govern the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion. But I want to take a minute to get the views around inclusion within the boardroom. And Sid, I'd like to ask for your perspectives. I mean, again, when we make progress of getting diversity within the boardroom, we need to kind of avoid the concept of tokenism and really allow for inclusion and effectiveness of diverse board members. So I would love, Sid, your views. And again, how do we not only look at moving the needle on representation, but also diversity, equity, inclusion in the boardroom, also paying it forward on governance, but just would love your perspectives first on within the boardroom.
Well, sure, Carey. Well, let me first start with my own experience serving on a corporate board. I currently serve on a corporate board of a private multi-million-dollar company. I was their first person of color, and I mean person of any color: Black, Latino, Asian, Pacific, the very first. And I knew when I was going into that meeting that I was going into a culture where they were not used to having a person of color in the boardroom. So for me, it was a multi-pronged approach. The first approach is what I do something called declare. Declare means I know I'm a Black Latino. I want to make sure that I know that I'm in this board as a person of color that is going to be contributing to this room, because I want them to know that my goal is to bring my authentic self into that boardroom. But on top of that is providing the looking for those resources. If you're someone that is not familiar with how our board functions, there are many great resources. Many of our ABD and of course Deloitte have great resources on the functionality of our corporate board. But for those of us that have experience serving on these boards, it's knowing that we can make an impact either through the committees when various situations happen, whether it's CEO succession, whether it's deciding whether you're going to pay a dividend or a share repurchase. A lot of things that happen at the board level, including giving strategic direction, and you can do that in a way that not only shows your contributions to the board, but also maintains your authentic self of who we are as people of color that are serving on a board. So the notion that that there was the issue of tokenism, which certainly we have to address, especially if a company is saying this is one and done, I pick my person of color and that's it. Companies need to recognize that you should be thinking about the totality of how to improve diversity on your boards, including having your multiple diversities, having Black, Latino, Asian, particularly, and women, and particularly women of color on these boards are very important. And then you give them the opportunity to lead and to serve in these in the various roles that come with a board, and we can succeed. But my message always is that never forget where we come from, never forget who we are, and that's why I often, when I serve when I get on my first board of any time I'm joining a board for the very first time, is I declare, because you already know who I am. I want to let you know that I know who I am when I'm in this board meeting, and that's something that we must continue to promote when with our existing women and people of color serving on boards. That it's okay to be your authentic self while succeeding and making contributions to the board and the board's direction.
Thanks, Sid. I absolutely know and feel very strongly that we are absolutely our best when we can be our authentic selves. And I do think that there will be certain boards, even in the boardroom and then beyond, where we have to think about the culture of the board to really allow that to happen. But I love that concept of authenticity. I think we all do, and we want to make sure that we are creating that inclusive environment where we can all be our very best. So I really appreciate your comments there. All right, so we're going to go into a little bit of a round robin session, and I'd like to kind of hear from all of our panelists your perspectives on the same question, which is, as we move forward, what's one piece of advice or one kind of key tenet that you would underscore for boards? We all are trying to make a difference around diversity, equity, and inclusion in our boardrooms, in the organizations that we govern. I would love to hear, again, your piece of advice or one key tenet. So I will start first with Linda.
All right. I'm going to say that change is happening, and it's happening much more quicker than I think anybody might be comfortable with, but regardless, it is happening. And I would just challenge and say to boards, be the leader instead of the follower on diversifying your boards. This is your opportunity, and I think this next generation that's coming up is expecting it of all of us. And so I just want to encourage boards, lead, don't follow.
You're always so good with the one-liners, Linda. I'll throw in the measured and matters thing too, but I love that. I love that concept. Lead, don't follow. And I think we absolutely need more boards leading versus following. So Lorraine, we'll go to you. What is, again, one piece of advice or one key tenet you have as we look forward?
Well, I think boards need to lead with intentionality and commitment and a sense of urgency. So don't just stare at the problem, address it head on. We already talked about the fact of how to get it to diversify your board, why it's important. So they've got to get committed and actually do it. So get it done is what I would say.
All right, that is simple and straightforward to the point. Let's just get it done. I like that. And again, we're making progress, but much more progress to be made. And Mike, over to you. Again, one piece of advice or one key tenet that you would underscore as we move forward here.
To be clear about what skills, matrix, and needs that you have as a board, and do not assume, underline, do not assume that there are not women and people of color who are capable of fulfilling those skill needs. So be intentional, but don't assume that there aren't anyone that has the skill sets to do what you need on that board.
Thanks, Mike. I like that, but the concept, again, of being intentional, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then finally, Sid, I would like to ask you that same question. One piece of advice you have, one key tenet that you would have as we look at moving forward.
Well, I'm going to bring my econometrics background and give a mathematical formula, and that is D times I squared. Diversity times inclusion times intentionality. And If you look at that from a mathematical perspective, you can tell which companies are going to truly be intentional about their inclusion. Because as you know, if you take any, you can say, we want diversity, we want to be inclusive, but what is anything times zero? Zero, which means that you can have diversity, you can have an inclusion, and all these initiatives, but if your intentionality is at zero, then that means everything is zero. So you have to have diversity times inclusion times intentionality, which is I call D times I square. And that is going to tell you the difference between those that believe in inclusion, those that support it, versus those that champion it. And those that have a strong intentionality, then you're going to see a magnifying effect with diversity and inclusion on boards. And those are the companies that not only you're going to see that will truly make a difference when it comes to diversity on boards, but they will also see progress in terms of how the culture evolves, because the culture is governed by the board and the CEO, and how it will make a difference with the company, and ultimately how it will make a difference to your business and your bottom line.
Okay, and on that note, I would like to ask you all, just again, all of your organizations are on this mission, and I so appreciate what you all are doing, not only with supporting what we do on board governance, but really the impact that we're all trying to make on society here. So as we close out this session, I will just ask each of you to maybe share one goal that you each have around your own organization. So Linda, I will start with you and Leap, if you could just share that for our audience.
I would say for us, it's really related to our vision of the organization, which is diverse leaders shaping communities for the benefit of all. And for us specifically, diverse leaders being inclusive of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and definitely working in collaboration and in partnership with other communities, diverse communities, because we know that none of us can do it alone.
Yes, it takes a village, as they say, right? And I would love to just also get Lorraine's views on that. Lorraine from Catalyst, a goal.
We have a goal to get more diverse women on boards. This is the place where there's a hole. As we've talked about, we've been making some good progress in terms of women on boards. We set an objective, the community set an objective about 30%. We're moving towards that. But when it comes to women of color, we still have a big hole. So that's where we're really focused. We're focused on not only helping boards be aware of the need, but also building that pipeline of qualified women of color who have the experiences that would qualify them for boards. So we're doing, sponsorship and helping with mentoring and exposure and bringing them into the network. So that's really our number one focus right now.
Great, thanks, Lorraine, and so appreciate the progress that you've helped drive here. And Mike, would love your views from an ELC perspective.
Our goal is to significantly increase the number of Black board-ready candidates for publicly traded boards globally, as well as Black C-suite ready Black candidates for P&L and CEO level roles. That sort of is a point to entry to board. So that's a very aggressive expectation that we have, and we're really excited about our momentum in that area. But that's our focus right now.
Great, thanks, Mike. And again, so appreciate your leadership and how you're driving ELC to make a difference here. And then finally, Sid, on HACR, of particular relevance and interest to this audience, again, a goal that you have.
So our goal is not only to increase the number of Hispanics and Latinos serving on corporate boards, but we are razor focused on Latinas. And just to give you some perspective when you think about this, is that, according to our good friends at the Latino Donor Collaborative, the Latino gross domestic product is about $2.3 trillion. But if you do the math and aggregate and disaggregate what part of that is Latinas, I estimate that Latina gross domestic product is somewhere probably around $1.5 trillion, maybe 1.4, 1.5. Regardless of whether you're in that range, we know that Latinas are probably somewhere around between the 11th and 13th largest economy in the world. And when you factor in that the average age for Latinos is 27, that the mode age is 11, that it's growing faster than all the developed countries and many developing countries, then you just see the disparity that at 1% of Latinas on Fortune 500 boards, and even fewer when you go down to the Russell 2000 companies, you'll see that there is significant work that must be done. And so we're very laser focused on increasing Latinos on boards, but very laser focused on Latinas.
Great, thank you, Sid. I so appreciate, again, also what you are doing. I appreciate how you've hosted this session for our HACR audience here, just knowing, again, there is opportunity and progress that we all can make here. I also want to just on that note, just say a very gracious thank you to our esteemed panel here with Linda, Lorraine, Mike, and Sid. Again, all of what you're doing personally and with your organizations is really highlighting a mission here. And we at Deloitte are so proud to be teaming with you to make an impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our boardroom or otherwise. And I think we all know it's of such importance to how we govern, how we lead, to what we do in society, and frankly, for all of our futures. So I just want to say a personal thank you, and on behalf of Deloitte, a thank you. I also think some of the great remarks that you made today around recruitment, around what gets measured matters, about really looking in the broader ocean in terms of candidates, thinking differently about the skills and roles in terms of really bringing in candidates into the boardroom, and also just thinking about how do we not only use both the carrot and the stick in terms of business performance and regulation to kind of hold ourselves accountable, but that it does take intentionality. And then once we actually get diverse candidates in the boardroom, how do we help be inclusive and really make them successful and pay that forward? So I do want to just say again, thank you all for those excellent nuggets of intelligence. It is important for all of us to understand that as we move forward. And I thank you all again for your leadership, and for our audience. We hope you have a great rest of your time at the symposium, and hope that you've taken some things back to challenge yourself with, both at your organizations and at your boards. So with that, we will bring this topic to a close, and thank you all.
Lorraine, and Sid for this session supplementing the 6th edition of the Missing Pieces Report.